Imagine, you're standing in the middle of a glamorous Western country. On paper, it's one of the world's wealthiest empires. But if you scratch the surface, you start noticing some very strange symptoms. A super-rich capital drowning in luxury, while the rest of the country is rotting and stuck in stagnation. A massive, ballooning national debt, politics so divided it's paralyzed, and a government begging for cash from foreign investors just to keep the lights on. Sounds like a Latin American country struggling with a crisis in the 90s, right? But no, welcome to France. When a first world country starts showing the classic diseases of the third world, we call it third-worldization, the impoverishment of a superpower. Welcome to the Capital Anatomy. Hit subscribe so you don't miss our anatomical views on the truth about money and power in the world. 1. 2. France's and the Gilded Cage Paradox. If you take the economic map of France and fold it in half, you'll see it doesn't match up at all. Basically, you're looking at two completely different countries stuffed inside a single border. In the center, we have the Île-de-France region, meaning Paris and its surrounding areas. It operates like an independent kingdom, a money-printing machine with labor productivity nearly 40% higher than the national average. It sucks up almost 63% of the highest-paying, most highly skilled jobs. All the elites, brain power, and financial resources are pulled right into the center by its gravity. But step away from those glamorous lights and head north, or along the old industrial belts. You'll land in places like Île-de-France, or cities like Valenciennes and Saint-Étienne. The scene here looks like a croissant version of the Rust Belt in the US. Unemployment shoots straight past 15%, infrastructure is crumbling, and there are areas where the rate of youth who are not in education, employment, or training crosses the 17% mark. At this point, you're seeing a very familiar economic motif, right? That is the classic trait of developing nations. A giant growth pole sucking up all the air and capital, leaving the rest of the country to slowly suffocate from a lack of oxygen. But this isn't even the worst part. You're probably wondering, if the economy is so torn and tattered, why does the French stock market still look as dazzling as a true superpower? The answer lies in a mechanism I call the luxury paradox. Every year, the luxury industry brings France about 75 billion euros in export revenue. Just four giants, LVMH, L'Oréal, Hermès, and Kering, make up a massive 38% of the entire weight of the CAC 40 index. Using the stock market as a gauge for the health of the French economy right now is like a doctor looking at the diamond-studded Rolex on your wrist and concluding that your vitals are working perfectly. It's beautiful, but it's just a statistical illusion. The reality is that this luxury creates a gilded cage. Making leather bags or mixing perfumes requires highly specific crafting skills, tightly planned out in traditional workshop clusters. It's not like building a steel or car factory, which can pull along a massive supply chain and create a trickle-down effect, bringing tens of thousands of jobs for blue-collar workers. A Hermès Birkin bag costs more than a used car, but its profits never drop into the pockets of an unemployed mechanic out in the suburbs. The top of the economic pyramid is flying high, but the foundation underneath is slowly sinking into the mud. Next, you'll see this crack directly destroying the most important thing: the youth. The youth unemployment rate in France is currently hovering around an alarming 18%. But the irony is that the country's social security system, famously known as one of the most generous in the world, has a fatal blind spot. This system favors older folks and settled families. If you're under 25 and don't have a job, good luck, because you won't automatically get the minimum RSA welfare benefit like older people do. That great social safety net has a giant hole ripped right where the future generation stands. This leaves young people totally stuck. Move to Paris to find a job, and the salary isn't enough to pay rent. You want to apply for public housing in the capital? Go ahead and apply, then find a comfy corner to sleep in, because the wait time in Paris can drag on for up to 10 years. Owning a basic roof over your head becomes a luxury privilege just as exclusive as carrying an LVMH bag. The new workforce is locked out. When you're stuck on housing and stuck on income, the inevitable chain reaction happens. You're forced to delay starting a family, and the birth rate of the entire nation takes a nosedive. And when the younger generation can't even afford to buy a ticket into the future, the government is forced to step in. They use money to patch up every hole. That is the real start of all the trouble, opening up the root cause that will lead us to the next core issue: half a century of an economy living on credit cards and deficits. 2. The money-guzzling machine and half a century of swiping credit cards. If you're running a family or a business, and every year you spend more money than you make, How long would you last? 3 years? 5 years? The bank will definitely come knocking and foreclose on your house before you can even celebrate year 10. But if you're the French government, you can do that for 51 years straight. From 1974 until now, the French state apparatus has never had a single year where revenue was greater than spending. They run the entire country not with the actual cash flow they generate, but by constantly opening new credit cards to pay off the old ones. Just like a generous uncle addicted to designer brands, constantly throwing money around to treat friends to parties and swearing to pay off the debt next month from the 70s all the way to right now. As a result, this country's public debt has skyrocketed 3 times over in just 25 years, hitting a massive threshold of nearly 3.4 trillion euros. Common sense would tell you, if you know you're running out of money, why doesn't the government tighten its belt and cut spending? The reason lies in an extremely ironic model I call the tyranny of the median voter. Right now, France's social protection spending takes up about 33% of its GDP, the highest rate in the entire bloc of OECD developed countries. In France, up to nearly 60% of households are net beneficiaries. That means the total amount of welfare, healthcare, and benefits they receive from the state is more than the tax money they actually contribute to the treasury. So why not go collect more money? Why not tax the rich hiding in that gilded cage over in Paris? Well, France tried exactly that with the famous ISF wealth tax law. Taxing the rich to give to the poor is always a beautiful Robin Hood story in theory, until you realize that Robin Hood's victims can totally just call their lawyers, charter a private jet, and move their residency straight to neighboring Belgium or Switzerland. Reality proved this to be a self-destructive disaster. By hunting down the rich, it's estimated that France kicked anywhere from 143 billion to 200 billion euros in assets right out of its national borders. The important thing you need to understand is, when the rich leave, they don't just take their supercars or luxury bags with them. They take venture capital, money to build new factories, funds to incubate startups, and the drive to create jobs. Instead of pumping blood into the real economy, the wealth tax suffocated the oxygen supply for businesses, sinking labor productivity even deeper into stagnation. When revenue doesn't cover spending, the population ages, and businesses abandon their factories. 3 chokeholds and the doom loop. Imagine you're forced to join a massive pyramid scheme where you have to pay money every month to feed the people who got in before you, with the promise that when you get old, the people who get in after you will pay to feed you. Sounds like a financial scam that could land you in jail, right? But actually, that is the French pension system, and it's totally legal. It's called the pay-as-you-go pension model, and it's the first chokehold suffocating this country, the demographic crisis. For a model like this to work, you need a waterfall of young people constantly pouring into the job market. But France is running dry on that supply. In 2024, only 663,000 babies were born, down over 21% compared to 10 years ago. Meanwhile, every year up to 800,000 baby boomers retire, but only 700,000 young people enter the labor market to replace them. That gap of 100,000 people every year creates a terrifying financial burden. France is dedicating nearly 14% of its gross domestic product just to pay pensions. To give you a picture, this number swallows up the education, defense, and transportation budgets combined. Basically, France right now looks like a giant nursing home with nuclear weapons. Back in the 70s, for every 5 working people, they supported 1 elderly person. Fast forward to today, that number has dropped to roughly 2 workers supporting 1 retiree. And that leads to the ultimate outrage from the younger generation. They're breaking their backs, paying record-high taxes to fund pensions for the previous generation people who, ironically, have a higher after-tax income sitting at home than the young folks working their butts off out there. This creates a panic over productivity. If fewer people are working, you have to work more efficiently to make up for it. But since 2015, France's labor productivity has only inched up about 0.3% per year, which is half the average of developed countries. Next is the second chokehold, the flight of the industrial sector. In the 1980s, manufacturing made up about 26% of the French economy. Today, it's shrunk down to just about 13%. Over the past 2 decades, France has wiped out nearly 900,000 factory jobs. Why does this number matter? Because a job on the factory floor isn't just one job. When you build a factory, you need trucks to transport goods, you need diners for the workers, you need auto shops, you need schools for their kids. Losing one factory job drags down 3 to 4 service jobs around it. The cause of this great exodus leads straight back to the social security issue we just talked about. To feed its massive welfare system, France has to tax labor extremely heavily. Hiring an employee in France is like going to a restaurant, but being forced to tack on a mandatory 50% service fee to your bill. Meanwhile, in Germany, this rate is only 30%, and in Poland, it's 20%. Sky-high costs combined with expensive energy prices have turned manufacturing in France into an act of financial irrationality. I'll illustrate the devastating fallout of that irrationality through the story of the Michelin rubber plant in the Cholet region. In late 2024, Michelin announced it was shutting down this factory along with another facility, tossing 1,254 workers out on the street. From producing 4.3 million tires in 2019, the plant dropped to just 2.6 million. Energy in Europe is twice as expensive as in North America, and they couldn't keep tanking the losses forever. When the factory doors closed, the entire economy of the town of Cholet dropped dead in a domino effect. The factory shuts down, houses sit unrented, food and clothing stalls can't sell their goods, and schools empty out. So where do these jobs go? They aren't running to Eastern Europe anymore. They're leapfrogging straight to North Africa. Morocco is becoming the new factory for French car makers. The Renault Group plans to localize 80% of its production in Morocco by 2030, while Stellantis is picking up the entire Citroën assembly line and moving it there. This hollowing out leads to a classic syndrome of third world countries: chronic trade deficits. In 2024, France ran a goods deficit of about 100 billion euros. When a country doesn't produce enough stuff for itself, they only have two options: go borrow money from outsiders or sell off the assets in the house. Through the two chokeholds above, we see that a weak economy will need major surgery. But in France, the surgeons are busy throwing scalpels at each other. That is the third chokehold: political paralysis. The French lower house right now looks like a PTA meeting totally out of control, split into 5 factions where nobody is willing to budge: the far right, centre, centre left, and far left. Not a single bloc holds enough of a majority to get anything done on their own, but they all have the power to veto everyone else. The saddest record just went to Prime Minister Michel Barnier. After barely 3 months in office, his government was overthrown in a historic no-confidence vote. This is the first time this has happened since 1962. What was Barnier's crime? He tried to cut the deficit by using a special clause to sneak the budget through without a parliamentary vote, and as a result, he got kicked right out of his seat. French politics has fallen into total paralysis. President Macron once shed blood, sweat, and tears just to push the retirement age from 62 to 64. The result was the streets of Paris engulfed in a sea of fiery protests, trash piled up to their necks, and his centrist faction permanently having its reputation ruined. Now, touching pensions or cutting welfare is considered a poison pill that no politician dares to swallow. The fallout is that voters have lost absolute faith in the elites, pushing them toward anti-establishment extremes. Marine Le Pen's right-wing faction soared from 18% to 33% in 7 years, while the far left also scooped up over 20% of the support. Half the country wants to smash the current system, and the other half has no idea how to clean up the mess. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this point. If you were a leader facing a paralyzed government machine and drowning in debt, would you choose to tax higher to get the money, or risk riots to cut social welfare? Leave your perspective down in the comments, because this equation isn't just a France problem. 4. The existential collapse and the Italianization moment. When politicians act like preschoolers fighting over toys and refuse to clean up the mess, who is going to step up and punish them? The answer isn't in the ballot box, it's in the bond market. The French Court of Audit just blared a deafening red siren. In 2024, the country's deficit reached about 175 billion euros, equal to 6% of the economy's size. That massive public debt lump of 3.3 trillion euros now requires the French to pay almost 59 billion euros a year just in interest alone. If nobody hits the brakes, by 2030, debt will cross the 125% of GDP mark. When that happens, just the interest on the loans will bite off over 100 billion euros a year, and that's not even counting the extra 50 billion euros the government has to dig up to bail out a bleeding pension system. And here is where the mask really slips off. Let's look at an indicator called the oat-bund spread. Sounds like a hard-to-digest European side dish, but it's actually a thermometer for measuring fear. If you and your neighbor go to borrow money, but your neighbor named Germany does business with extreme discipline, the bank will lend to him at a low interest rate. Because you, meaning France, are spending recklessly and your house is a mess, the bank is going to force you to take a higher interest rate to cover the risk. That difference is the spread. After the recent shock of political instability, this spread shot up to nearly 80 basis points. For every single point it ticks up, France loses billions more in taxpayers' euros, thrown straight into the pockets of creditors just to pay interest. But the creepiest part is, their creditors aren't even from inside the house. About 53% of France's debt is currently sitting in the hands of foreign investors. This exposes a fatal weakness that heavily reeks of an emerging market style. Just one piece of bad political news, and foreign investment funds will panic and sell off, driving borrowing costs through the roof. It's a cosmic level of irony. France was the author who wrote the ironclad fiscal rules of the European Union, demanding member states not exceed a 3% deficit and keep debt under 60% of GDP. Yet right now, they're running a 6% deficit and owe up to 113%. They look no different than a nutritionist writing a weight loss book, only to get caught wolfing down a giant bucket of fried chicken in the middle of the night. At this point, you might ask, so how do you get out of this swamp when raising taxes makes businesses run away, cutting welfare makes citizens burn the streets, and increasing the population is pure sci-fi? The only answer that's least likely to torch a political career is productivity. 5. The emergency exit and the robot economy. If you want to produce more wealth, but you can't birth more people, you don't dare force old folks to work, and immigration is a political minefield waiting to explode, you only have one option. You have to make the current workforce generate double or triple the output without increasing marginal labor costs. That solution doesn't lie in empty slogans, it lies in robots. Let's talk about the economics of robots for a second. It's super simple. Renting a humanoid robot is exactly like how companies today rent cloud servers. You pay the upfront investment, and from then on, your monthly operating costs are fixed and predictable down to the last penny. A humanoid robot doesn't need sick leave, doesn't go on strike for higher wages, and doesn't need social security contributions. If it runs 20 hours a day and 350 days a year, its output easily crushes the productivity of 4 normal workers combined. Right in France, this ecosystem is quietly taking shape. The Renault Group just teamed up with Wondercraft to develop the Calvin robot line specifically for factories, aiming to eliminate heavy lifting jobs, protect workers, and make assembly line productivity skyrocket. 6. The lesson from the collapse. Honestly, today's story isn't about trash-talking France. France is just a reflecting mirror, and the image in that mirror is exactly the future that every developed nation could step into. This story is about the illusion of wealth and the mathematical truths that cannot be bent by emotions. First, remember that a country cannot survive just on a few national champions at the very top. No matter how sparkly those luxury bags are, or how packed the tourists are around the Eiffel Tower, they can't feed an entire nation. If an economy lacks broad-based productivity growth, doesn't create foundational jobs, and doesn't pay a decent wage to the middle class, then all the glamour you see in the headlines is just a subsidized theatrical act. Second, the welfare state is essentially an economic contract between generations. It doesn't run on compassion, it runs on demographics and growth rates. When the number of babies born every year drops to the 663,000 mark, and life expectancy keeps extending, the pay-as-you-go pension model instantly morphs into a zero-sum game. It turns into a brutal war over a piece of the pie between the elderly who want to rest and the youth who are drowning in despair. Finally, never fight the gravity of the financial market. If cowardly politicians can't discipline their own budget ledgers, the market will step in and do it for them without mercy. Spiking borrowing rates aren't some conspiracy theory by underground capitalist forces. It's simply the reality check that the market sends you, demanding you pay up for your own stagnation and empty promises. A collapse rarely starts with a massive bang. It always begins with the clicking sound of a debt printing press running at full capacity. Thanks for watching until the end. Hit that like button and subscribe to the Capital Anatomy so you don't miss our economic breakdowns in the upcoming videos.